Hello, everyone. Welcome in. It looks like we have a bunch of people hopping in here, about 23, 24 or so. Glad to have you for this EDU webinar. My name's Jon McBride. I'll be kind of moderating, getting us started today, but so glad to have all of you joining us from wherever you're coming in from. Hope you can enjoy today's webinar. The second in this EDU web kind of webinar series leading up to our digital summit, which will be this coming summer. We're excited and looking forward to that. No matter what that format might look like, a vaccine on the horizon, who knows what that does for an event in mid to early August or so, but whatever that looks like, we're excited for another eduWeb Digital Summit coming up. So I work at BYU. I also serve as a member of the eduWeb leadership team, and excited to help moderate these webinars and get them going. But today, we're super excited to have Rebekah Tilley with us to present. A lot of you have seen her project that she's going to be talking about today, and we'll jump into that in just a minute. But this is the second of a monthly webinar series, as I said, that will lead up to that eduWeb 2021 summit. And we're going to talk a little bit, just some housekeeping here at the beginning about what that lead up looks like. But we're super excited to have Rebekah here. That this is the name of the presentation today. That just really honing in on this idea of support, which is so important for our digital communities right now, and especially when it comes to mental health intervention. And so excited to have Rebekah tell us all about this project. But this is something we want to kind of tease here at the beginning, and we'll talk about this more on social media. But this is the first that we're talking about it publicly. We're excited to introduce something called the eduWeb Inner Circle, where if you attend at least 5 of these eduWeb webinars here in 2020, 2021. So if you already attended our last one with Josie and you're here today, you're almost halfway there. But really, we want to use this to create some membership and community and affinity in what we're calling the Inner Circle, which will provide some of the benefits you can see below here. So more will come of this, and we'll talk about this on our website and on our social channels. We want to tease it a bit here that attendance at these webinars is going to give you some cool different perks this year. And of course, you can see those things on our social accounts. You can connect with us there on Twitter, on the website, Facebook, and LinkedIn. But back to our presentation today. We're so excited to have Rebekah with us. Just a bit of an introduction of Rebekah. She manages social for the top-ranked Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa as a communications and social media specialist. I found this bio information on the web somewhere, but it says when she's not telling the stories of Tippie, she enjoys throwing down at Moth Story Slam competitions where she's twice placed in the top 3. So that's impressive, and we'll let Rebekah tell us about that if she wants to, or we can let that stand. But Rebekah does incredible work. She's a great follow on Twitter. She and I have interacted and connected there for a while. We've had great phone calls before. She's someone I look up to in this industry, and the project that she's going to talk to us about today is one that I've loved, and I know a lot of you throughout higher ed have really admired. So we're excited to have a bit of a deep dive there, and we'll throw things over to Rebekah here. Oh man, I've got to figure out how to. Oh, it's in alphabetical order to share her screen. There we go. So Rebekah, we'll get started here in a second, and really thanks to all of you for being with us. She'll present for the first part here and has some slides to show us, but then if you want to use the chat feature or the questions feature, we'll be taking questions from you throughout and can use that to do a bit of a Q&A afterward as well. So with that, we'll turn things over to Rebekah. And Rebekah, thanks again for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jon. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. I look up to your work a lot, actually, and so I was very appreciative to be invited to do this. So for all of you, I'd like to welcome you to the University of Iowa. This picture was taken before we had our most recent snowfall, but we're known as the Writing University because we're home to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and this writing actually infuses all of our campus curriculum. We were recently ranked the #1 public university for writing in the disciplines by US News and World Report. We're also known for a rich legacy of our social progressiveness, and we have a very collaborative kind of team atmosphere here at the university. And that isn't just with in academics, right? Between academics working together across silos, it also includes across our campus. So when I joined the Tibby College of Business 3.5 years ago, Michael Benning, who is the social media director for the University of Iowa, reached out to me and really helped to get me set up to succeed well and with the work that I do for the college. So I'm excited to share with you today a little bit about a project that we did back in October. You know, if you follow me on Twitter, you're familiar with just the basic story, right? Like we did an Instagram story where we talked about, we did a mental health check-in. And so, you know, the crux of it was it was a 2-story Instagram story, very basic, nothing fancy. You know, we know that the semester's been outside the norm. We offered a slidey scale to rank someone's mental health. Second story was, hey, you know, here are 2 resources for you. One is our embedded psychologist. One is our here, you know, if you're not a business student, here's the number for the university counseling services. The additional step that we took as a team was for anybody who ranked their mental health at a 0, we reached out to them with a direct message to follow up and just said, you know, hey, we noticed that you've indicated you're struggling right now. You know, can we help you make an appointment? That ended up being highly successful. Like we had some really positive interactions with our students kind of in the DMs, and in one case even an alum who still followed us. And I don't know, our student body felt really seen and cared for just through that exercise. So today what I would like to do actually is 2 different things. One is I want to deconstruct the idea, right? Like I'm always really fascinated by how people brainstorm ideas and how they come up with things. And I want to just walk you through that process on our end of things. And then the other thing I'd like to do is just, if you are interested in doing something similar, offer some takeaways and lessons learned from that whole process. So we'll start with deconstructing the idea. So I am a big believer that social media can only reflect what is true. So, you know, we can only showcase the authentic experience, right? And if it doesn't ring true, people can smell that immediately. And so one of the things that made it possible for us to do this mental health check-in is that we are operating within a college culture that is very aware of very aware of mental health and the need to support mental health. That's evidenced in a number of different ways. One of them is, I think it was 2 years ago now, we started offering light boxes for checkout. You know, here in Iowa, winter comes, you know, early, it snows early, it gets dark, and, you know, seasonal affectiveness disorder is something that a lot of our student body struggles with, and this is a tool to help kind of overcome that. So that's one piece. You know, we, like many places, we do therapy dogs and that kind of thing around like finals week. And then probably the biggest thing that we've done over the last year is we hired an embedded mental health psychologist. And the benefit of this is, you know, it is a direct benefit to our enrolled business students. It's an opportunity for them to very quickly and easily get in touch with a therapist if they need therapeutic services. The other thing that that kind of brought about this whole thing is, honestly, Jon, your work with tackling sexual assault on campus really changed my perception of what kinds of topics that you can talk about on social media. You know, I think for a lot of folks, there's still this perception that social media is all about memes and jokes, and, you know, and there's very much a place for that. Like that's, you know, that's the fun part of social media. But then because we have this unique opportunity to dialogue, right, through this platform, it's also an opportunity for us to tackle hard topics. And so one of the ways that that's worked out for us at the business school lately has been, we've tackled topics like, when we're talking about light therapy boxes, we're saying, if you're showing these kinds of symptoms, you might have seasonal affectiveness disorder. This is what you can do to tackle that. That's normalizing, addressing mental health. We've also tackled topics like academic dishonesty, like what is it, why it's a problem, and why, that's not upholding what it is to be a student that we would want to graduate. And then the other thing was too, like during the George Floyd protest, the business school's building was spray painted, and so we had an internal kind of debate about, do we show that, right? Like that's something true that is happening right now, and how do we reckon with that? How do we think about that? And so we ultimately ended up doing that in part because we feel really strongly about tackling hard topics on social media. From a technical standpoint, I get a lot of inspiration actually watching, if you follow any of the higher ed social media hashtags, like on Twitter, I ran across this tweet that Shelby Jarman at Utah Law put out talking about a way that she had used Instagram's native tools to kind of work around if you don't have like a swipe up link on Instagram. And she's like, oh, I found this thing where, swipe here for a link to the full story, and then you can just DM them the link. And I was like, oh, that's so clever. And I ended up taking that back to my team, and I said, hey, just food for thought. Let's like think about this if we ever have a need for it. And that planted a seed. And then I am super fortunate to work with a team of 5 social media interns who are just really outstanding young professionals. And I can't tell you this, working with them is just the best part of my job, honestly. And so, we have a weekly meeting where we kind of sit down and talk through, content that's coming up for the week, how we're going to approach different topics. And so early on, when our embedded mental health psychologist began her work with us, I had her come to a meeting and kind of talk us through, like, what is she doing here? And one of the things she talked about was, mental health is more than just about, sitting on a couch, like having a conversation with a therapist. It's also, how it's systematic in many respects, right? Like, what kind of structures do you have in place that are supportive of mental health? And how are ways that we can think about that? And so she also opened my team's minds to, what are ways that we can talk about things that are done in a mentally healthy way, and how can we approach topics like excessive drinking or things like that. And so out of those conversations, as we kicked around all this stuff, one of the ideas that one of my interns had, Julia So, she is a junior marketing student here at Tippy. She actually came up with the concept of, what if we do a mental health check-in, we provide people with a list of resources, and then we direct message anyone who ranks their mental health at a 0. That was her brainchild, and that's what we latched onto. And then as a group, we sort of talked through, okay, when's the best time to do this, right? Because the best social media happens at the right time. And so one of the things that we thought about was, okay, what are the pain points of this semester? Like, this is a semester already full of pain points just with COVID. And as we thought ahead, we're like, okay, we know midterms are always stressful. And then we also recognized that is about the time where everything gets really cold here in Iowa. And so all of the gatherings that students were having on the Pentecrust and other places outdoors where they could be masked and socially distanced, yet, with each other, a lot of those options are going to go away. And so, one of the key things that helps our mental health, right, is connection with others. And so if you're losing a piece of, a mental health coping mechanism as you are stepping into a stressful time, that's a moment where you really might need to reach out to a mental health professional. So that was what brought about the timing of that whole situation. So some takeaways from our experience. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but it's really important to invest in your social media. And I kind of mean that in two ways. You know, one of them obviously is I'm really fortunate to work at a place that, you know, recognizes the value of social media. And so when I stepped into this role, like a good 50% of my job was devoted to just social media content. And then the other thing was I was given a budget to hire on interns. And so, like, you know, there was a financial commitment to the investment of social media. Um, the other part about it too is that I think this would not have worked if we hadn't for years and years talked to our audience, right? Like we have established this dialogue, this place of, you know, we've put out great content over a long period of time. We've talked about hard issues. We've become a trusted source for students, and that's why this kind of thing could be successful. And to me, that sort of reminded me of, like, you know, the day in, day out, week by week work that we, you know, that if you do social media for your institution, like why it's important ultimately. So in moments like this, we can step into a place and, you know, potentially really positively impact people's lives. So some nitty gritty stuff. If you do decide to do something like this, you need to basically clear your calendar for about a 24-hour period because, you know, we ended up direct messaging over 100 students for an initial reach out. And the way that we sort of broke this out was one of my social media interns, Bella Wolfson, she did the initial kind of hunk of hours and then direct message people, and then would very quickly alert me if I needed to step in to address a more challenging scenario. So I'm someone who has been through suicide prevention training. I'm also sort of the adult in the room when it comes to handling our social accounts. And so anything that was beyond just a basic referral, I was at the ready to have conversations with folks. And so it's important for me to know, okay, if I need to call someone quickly because I'm concerned about a student being suicidal, I need to know what that number is. If someone's having an academic problem, I need to know kind of who that person is. And you know, for the most part, all of the responses were very positive, but we did have a couple of students that, you know, were disgruntled about things that were, you know, they just needed to be addressed. And, you know, what better time to do it than before it spilled out into like a public facing place, right? Like, let's have that conversation in a DM and then, you know, listen to their concerns and be like, hey, you know, yeah, that's really not great that that's happening to you. I know who you can talk to help resolve this. Are you okay with me helping, you know, with me connecting you with that person? The other thing that I think is really important to remember is that we don't want to give the expectation that we're a crisis line. So the way that I tried to approach it was, you know, we really need to think about, like, if we were, my attitude was one more of, you know, which if you were like an academic advisor and a student came to you and said, you know, I'm really struggling with my mental health, like, you're not going to sit there and have a therapeutic session with them right there because you're not qualified to do that and it's not your job. So our job there was to refer. And so as much as possible, we were trying to refer. We weren't trying to you know, diagnose anyone. We're not trying to give the expectation that we're going to do anything other than help connect people with resources that are already in place. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is, you know, through conversations that I've had with our embedded mental health psychologist, she did say that, you know, if other folks are interested in doing something like this, they might need to check in, or they should check in with their mental health professionals on their campus, just to make sure that, you know, there might be scenarios in which you might need to have some kind of little verbiage for informed consent on an Instagram story like this. And she mentioned Massachusetts in particular, but she said, you know, the laws can change, and it's just important to check in with the professionals in this situation just to make sure that, you know, we're being careful with our students and, you know, respecting them in the best way possible. So, yeah.
Thanks, Rebekah. That was so good. Such a good deep dive, and I'm excited. We have lots of time here to do a bit of a Q&A and ask some questions. For all of you tuning in, I know I saw a couple questions come in through the question box. Thanks to Lene and Brendan. If you have other questions, everyone feel free to chime in there in the question box or use the chat feature. But I've got a bunch of questions for you, Rebekah, in the meantime, so we can start off here. I love the example that this is in. You talked about brainstorming, but even the ideation for this, I think, is such a cool case study for us in higher ed, because, and this never ceases to amaze or surprise me, but there are so many in our industry and in our higher ed digital community who are just so willing to share ideas, right? And it's what's happening right now, like you in a busy time being willing to hop on and share how this went. But you talked about seeing Shelby's Instagram story at University of Utah Law, how you saw my presentation on us using Instagram stories to help with training our students on how to respond when a friend or roommate experiences sexual assault. There's so many of these things out there that we can gain ideas from, but you kind of combined these two things and other things that are out there and made it your own. Can you talk about, maybe to start, just your process, right? Because your process to kind of monitor, because it's a lot. There's the Higher Ed Social Facebook group I know a lot of us are a part of, but like, it takes time, right, to be intentional to see those things. So how do you kind of manage that personally, to take the time to gain inspiration from others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I too am busy with lots of other things. I think at this point, social media is about 25% of my job. So, um, um, you
Right.
know, and in fact, like if I can pop onto Twitter and just kind of quickly scroll, like maybe once a day, like I feel like that's kind of winning. Honestly, I guess there's a couple of things. One is I usually try to go to at least one conference a year if I can make it, because to me, those are the most inspirational places that I like, where I found my best ideas, and I had an opportunity to talk to other professionals about how they've done certain things or what worked for them. And so that's my number one thing. The other thing that we've got going here at the University of Iowa that I really appreciate is that, so Michael Benning, until COVID started, which we've all just been kind of thrown into chaos, but he would every month would do a campus social media managers meeting that kind of functionally was like a mini conference. Like, we would talk about really similar topics. And so that was another great way to take advantage of just the professionalism we have here on our campus. And Michael is just a rock star when it comes to social media. I mean, he's been top in like Rival IQ for the last couple of years, and just is an amazingly generous resource. The other thing I'll do too is, if I run across folks that are doing interesting things, I am not shy about sending them a LinkedIn message or a DM in Twitter. And honestly, no, like John, I know I've done that with you, where I'm like, I know you're doing some stuff with faculty research stuff. What does that look like for you? Or maybe you're doing something I've heard you're doing something like with student ambassadors, but then, and I have this other concept, but I want to see how your processes worked, because that could inform how I do something over here. So that's a big part of like the collecting up ideas. When it comes to actually executing them, I think one of the biggest things that I start with is, what does our audience need, right? And so I'm talking to a number of different audiences. Like our student audience largely lives on Instagram, but then we also have a huge alumni network as well. And so getting your head around them and their experiences is really important. And so I do that primarily in two different ways. One is, basic social listening, right? Like, you're just watching and learning and reading and kind of get a sense of the zeitgeist. But the other thing that has been super helpful to me has been, I have this team of social media interns they are my first and best focus group when it comes to concepts and ideas of things, and they are not shy when it comes to telling me like no, Rebekah, sorry. So, and I've even sent them, I think there was one time recently I sent one of my students some some copy for a potential caption, and she's like, yeah, you really need to take this out. And I'm like, am I talking too much like the kids? And she's like, yes, you are. And so, but, so that's late. So they're super helpful when it comes to that kind of thing as well.
And I love, yeah, I have a follow up to that, and then we have other questions coming in, and we'll
Okay.
get to those. Thanks everyone who's asking those, but I did want to follow up on that because I thought that was so interesting that you mentioned it was a brainstorming session and a student who ultimately had like the idea for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the same thing with us and that sexual assault project. It was a student who had the first idea that we need to talk about this on Instagram back in a day when Instagram was still pictures of food. But I think that's just so important, and it sounds like you have a great team there. Can you talk a little bit more about that brainstorming process with them? Like, what does that look like exactly? Like, when are you meeting with them? And I know maybe this is a trickier question, and I'm muddying it now, but I think brainstorming is a harder thing to do than a lot of us realize, right? Especially when we're in a room and there's a lot of people, like the loudest voices sometimes win, and we've got to be careful to create the right environment for that. So how do you create a good brainstorming environment with your team?
That's a great question. So, we meet once a week as a group, and we have a basic agenda of like, okay, here's some projects that we're working on. And we usually have at least 10 to 15 minutes set aside for brainstorming for whatever it is the thing is. And oftentimes the topic of the brainstorm will be someone will come to us and say, hey, we have a new embedded mental health counselor. You should do something on social. Like that's the charge. So then we're the ones who then have to sort of sit there and think about like, okay, that's a pertinent piece of information we want to get out into the world. What's the best way to do that across like a variety of platforms? Or, which platform is it? Is it multiple platforms? Like, what does that look like? So sometimes it's just, what is the message that you're trying to get across? Like nailing that down first. And then who is the audience for this? Okay, got that. What's the thing that's going to speak to that audience in the best possible way? Like, let's have a conversation about that. So that's one, like some of the nuts and bolts of it. I think when it comes to actually managing like a group of folks that are doing that is, I'm really, I don't know, they're one of, I really care about people that are willing to voice opposition to ideas, like if that makes sense. Like I want every negative thing that could possibly be said about something to be said in the room before we put it out there in the world. Like I want someone who's willing to say like, if we say it like this or frame it like this, someone is going to get mad. Like I want to let's deal with that right then and think about like, is that a legitimate concern? Is that something we need to just be okay with or not? And or does this picture indicate that there's a boy mansplaining to a woman, or does this like, let's have that conversation then. So I really tried hard to foster an environment amongst my team in particular where if you are someone who's raising a concern, you're not punished for that, right? Like you're not like, oh, you're not being team oriented. We had a great idea and then you pooped on it. Like, no, that's not what's happening here. Like you're bringing up a legitimate concern, and I try to reinforce that. Like that's a good point that Bella made, and we need to really take that into account. How are we going to address that? So, yeah.
Yeah, that is so well said. Thank you, Rebekah. Okay, getting to everyone else's questions here. First of all, I just want to acknowledge what Brendan says here, that he says, thank you for clarifying that you're trained and equipped to respond to students in crisis. That's such an important step. Was that QPR training? Is that the type of training you had for suicide prevention, or was it something else?
Actually, I did this a long time ago, back when I was in graduate school. I had someone important to me in my life who committed suicide, and that was a time where that was a real wake-up call for me of I need to know how to be a better support to someone if this ever happens again. So, but yeah.
Great. I think it's just such an important point for all of us if we're going to be doing this kind of work, to be able to get the training that we need Or also, I know for our big project, we ended up having people from our counseling and psychological services just on call to do the DMs themselves as well. So there's different ways we can do this, but Brendan's point is so important that we at least have someone who's really qualified to handle really important topics like this.
Yeah. And that's one of those things too with like your, your resources, right? So like you were resourced, John, to, you had staff where you could do that, right? In that situation. I did not. So I was, so I was really careful to make sure that we weren't overcommitting ourselves. So
great point. A question from Elizabeth here. Did you only use Instagram for this? Did you think about maybe using other platforms? Obviously, the Instagram story functionality was important, but your thoughts on platform-wise about why you chose to do this on Instagram?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. To me, that's about audience and where they are. So we very much primarily wanted to talk to our undergraduate student body and I guess just our student body in general. And the place where we do most of our communicating with our student body is on Instagram. And so, that might be different for different institutions. Like, maybe you've got a really hopping Facebook group of undergraduates, and that's where you do a lot of your conversation, you're conversing with folks, or, it can be a lot of different things, but it was the audience that drove the channel that we ultimately decided to use.
Great. A question from Katie here about organizational roadblocks / support. What was that process like? Did you have to run this up the line to get approval, and did that go okay?
One of the things I really appreciate about working at the Tippie College of Business is, I think part of this goes back to that college culture thing, right? So we place a really heavy emphasis on trying new things and being innovative. And I have a leadership team that really trusts me and supports me. And so I had the confidence to know that I didn't need their permission. So like and part of that was I knew that they were the ones who came in to me and charged me with like, we need to get the word out about this resource to students. And so I wasn't too concerned that they were going to slap my hand over getting the word out about that resource. But that could be different depending on your management and what they want, right? So like if and I suspect everyone kind of knows whether they need to run something up the chain, but I guess one thing I do wish I had done, I wish I had run this concept by our embedded mental health psychologist earlier, just because I think I could have used her as, even though we wanted to keep her separate from this whole situation, just because we don't want her affiliated with the institution. We need to keep those lines really separate. But I do wish I had touched base with her earlier in the process to kind of talk through, like, are there any pitfalls that we need to think through or potentially avoid, and that kind of stuff. I don't think it really would have, it would not have changed how we ultimately executed everything, but I think it would have just made us feel a little bit more confident in what we were doing.
Sure. And I think that speaks to, what you talked about earlier about trust, I thought was so important, that having trust with your community and your audience to be able to do something like this, it takes trust for them to be willing to reach out to do this. And I think you articulated that you got some real institutional trust to work on topics like this as well. And I think trust on both sides is just so important. Next question here from Stephanie, asking if you can talk a little bit more about informed consent. What verbiage might be necessary, who / what department typically handles that for a university? Yeah,
so this is one of those things that our embedded mental health psychologist and I kind of debated honestly afterward, because she was like, I really feel like it's important for students to know that if they slide on the slidey scale, that someone is going to see that answer. And then I was like, well, from my perspective, if you put that out there in the world, that is a you're going to prevent people from using it, right? and so then we were having a debate back and forth about, she's thinking it very much from a from a clinical standpoint, from a professional standpoint, and I am also thinking of it from a professional standpoint, but from just more the social media perspective versus the psychological or the embedded psychologist perspective. And so I guess what I'm at the end of the day, I would recommend just having that conversation with if you have a psychologist on campus that you can consult with on this kind of thing, because it does sound like in certain states you might have to do something like that. I don't think I would not change how we tackled it this time around, because I am 95% sure that everybody who uses the sliding scale in our audience recognizes that people can see it on the back end, and that's not a secret. But and we're not trying to trick anybody into anything. But I think I recognize why she was concerned about that, because we our business students, and our students in particular, are the kind of people that they like to put on a suit of armor, right? Especially when it comes to how they present themselves to the world. So the idea that they will have disarmed themselves, not realizing that someone might actually reach out to them, and that the person reaching out to them could be a peer, she thought was potentially quite damaging. And so, which I appreciated and recognized. I think the workaround there would be, maybe you want to consider, when you reach out with that initial direct message, like maybe you sign your name so that they know who the person is behind it, and it's not like someone they sit next to in their accounting class, and it's an adult who cares about them. That could be one way to kind of tackle this in a way that could address that potential concern.
That's a great idea and great insight. As a bit of a follow-up to that, were the DMs kind of one-offs? Like they said they executed on the function, you sent the follow-up, how are you doing? They said something, you said something else, and that was it? Or did you see any of them that kind of took a longer form conversation?
Yeah, so for the most part, we got a couple different kinds of responses. So like one of them would be like, "Oh, I didn't mean to do that," and you're like,
Oh,
"Sure
yeah.
you didn't," but yeah, that's fine if that's how you want to tackle it. Other folks are like, most of them honestly were like, "Hey, I really appreciate you saying something to me. I didn't know someone was going to respond to this, but I really appreciate that, and it's really cool that you're doing it. Thanks." And then we would respond with like, "Hey," or some people even said, "Actually, I have an appointment today," or I made an appointment yesterday," or something like that. And so then our follow-up would be something like, "That's really great to hear that you've taken this step to toward your mental health, and we applaud that, great job," or something like that. And then that was sort of the end of the conversation. Some conversations went a little deeper depending on what the issue was. So like we had one student who she didn't come back to campus. She was in Michigan. And so then she had a question of like, okay, can I be seen by our embedded mental health counselor in Iowa if I'm living in Michigan? And so like that was a thing where I had to go suss that out and figure it out. And so, and so that was a longer conversation. Or, there were some other students who had issues with like I'm having a problem in a class that I need resolved, and hadn't, and I think that ultimately it was my mental health is being damaged because I'm having this major problem in a class, and are you going to fix that for me? And so then there was some back and forth that had to happen there. So does that answer your question, Jon?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's just so interesting how it can vary, right? Like it's not a formula where, okay, you tell us your mental health, we say how are you doing, you say you're doing this well, and here's a resource, and it's done, right? Like there are obviously varying needs in our communities, and really, like, I think these types of projects are so powerful because we're giving our communities permission, right, to be able to express something, and just give them some sort of entry point if they need it. Like there's someone here who's going to be able to talk to you and help you. And yeah, maybe it needs to go to academic support services, or yeah, you need to know if there's, I know our counseling and psychological services has the same issue where like legally they can only offer that counseling to people who are within our state, right? Even over
Right.
Zoom and so there are issues like that, but I just think it's really cool, especially we've seen with Instagram DMs that there's just a level of vulnerability there that's really interesting. And like you said, you know, especially business students and others in high performance majors, there's this shield of armor. I think you said that well. People put on these shields of armor, but when we have an opportunity to give them permission to take that shield down and be a little vulnerable, it can be so powerful.
Real.
I'm going to combine questions from Brendan and Katie here, where they're asking maybe what's next for you, like what has this project prompted next for you? Do you think you'll want to do more mental health related content because of this? What did this kind of show you for what you can do next with this kind of thing?
Right. It's funny. When the very next thing that we're doing that's I think more directly related to this is we're going to very purposely take a social media break over the holidays, and honestly we kind of would historically do that and just not talk about it. And I think the thing that we're going to do a little bit differently this time is say, like, we are planning on not putting content on our channels because we know that one of the ways that we are going to be taking care of our mental health right now during this really stressful time is to get off our phones for a while. And we invite you to do the same because we think we know from research that oftentimes how much time we spend on social media is directly correlated to how depressed we are or how anxious we are. So like that's one little piece of something that we're planning on doing. Yeah, I think that's the thing that's most directly related. I think it's also given us some confidence to tackle some topics that we were a little bit scared of, and maybe not stuff that's directly related to mental health, but other topics that are a little bit like, is this going to be dangerous, right? So, we have reached out. We have some diversity, equity, inclusion, and student ambassadors within the business school that we've started working with on some Black History Month content that I'm super excited about, actually. Like, I think, and I don't know if we would have had the confidence to go after that if not for having tackled this and like seeing how that went and how it went well and taking lessons from that and applying it in the situation.
That's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned early on about how we can talk about hard things on social, and our audiences can respond really well to that. And I think that's a great takeaway here. I think it just feels so empowering, right? Once you can see that work well in a project, you can go on you can keep going on with that type of content. But your initial response to this question was fascinating to me, Rebekah. I think that it's so cool and so smart to take a break, especially in the world of marketing and communications, and thinking, okay, how do we leverage this? How do we boost this and get more engagements and da 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 da? And so I think if we looked at this even a few years ago, from kind of an analytics and marketing standpoint, it would be okay, like let's do more and more and more. But I love that you were able to take from this project that it wasn't just the engagement or getting more clicks or DMs that was the takeaway here. The takeaway was that you helped your community in a really important way, and the next step of helping that community could be doing less. Like that's such a cool perspective. I really like that.
Yeah, and to be fair, there was I'm grasping at her name. I met her at a conference. Shoot, why can't I remember her name? There was somebody on Twitter who like gave me this idea. So where like they were the ones who were like, we're taking this weekend off because we're exhausted. And I was like, kudos. Like,
Yeah.
so, oh shoot, it's one of the, oh, it's going to drive me crazy, but, oh shoot, what is her name? She spoke at one of the Case 2019 conference. She works at this like school that looks like Hogwarts. I've met her. She's got a dog and a
Emma?
Emma, yes, thank you.
Emma Gilmartin at University of Glasgow.
Thank you, Jon. Sorry, Emma, if you're here. Like, yeah, but she and her team did that. I think at some point in the middle of COVID, right, where it was just like such a slog and like everybody was so exhausted, and they announced that they were going to be doing this, and I was like, yeah, way to be, right? Like way to demonstrate this thing that we all should be doing, and just and go for it. And really at the end of the day, like is that, I think sometimes I'm not a numbers person naturally, so I'm always like, numbers can tell you things, but stories sing, right? Like stories are the things that really impact us and move us and shape us, and so I care about analytics to a degree, but then that's not. I feel like we hang our hats on that a little too much sometimes. Like we really need to step back and think about like, okay, what are we really trying to do here? It's not just get a like or get a comment, and it's how are we serving the people that we're trying to serve.
Yeah, that's such an important perspective, and I think, and cool that again, back to that point we made earlier, that you gained that inspiration from someone else in this higher ed community, but connecting that in this way to this project, I think is so cool. Another more specific question from Ava in the questions is, if you only reached out to students if they rated like exactly 0, or did you reach out if they were somewhere like 0 to 30 or something, or somewhere along that spectrum?
Yeah, so that's a judgment call you just have to kind of make. I mean, at the rate we were at with the resources we had, we were still DMing over 100 students, and given I was doing this with interns that had jobs and classes, and so in an ideal world, we would have reached out to folks that were below 50%, but then just given kind of what we were equipped with, we that was sort of our cutoff and what we chose to do.
Cool. That works. Okay. I think we're getting to the end of questions here. We can wrap up here soon and give you all back a few more minutes if you have 11 o'clocks coming up. But I just want to read a couple more feedback comments here. And I think this is important from Elizabeth. She says, thank you, Rebekah, for proclaiming that you're taking a break over the break. I've been wanting and planning to do this, but hesitant, but this confirms it. We're doing it too. So thank you for empowering others here, Rebekah. And then Lene, I think I'm not sure how to pronounce this first name, and I apologize if this is pronounced differently, but Lene, who's tuning in from Denmark, it's 6 p.m. when this started in Denmark, and she's still here, so thank you, Lene, for joining us. But she says, this is very inspiring. Before study started this summer, we used Instagram to ask our students what they worried about before coming back. We then shared out answers and even saved it as a highlight for others to see throughout the year. Thanks for sharing that so much. I think that's a cool project, and again gets to this idea of vulnerability and authenticity, and really not being afraid to share this very human and natural content, right? Again, going back a few years, it would be, no, like we're only sharing things that make us look really good, and of course our students are thriving, and everything is fine here at our university. But I love projects like this, and projects like yours, Rebekah, where we're admitting to our community, and it's not a big secret, but things are hard right now, and it's okay that it's hard. It's okay to not be okay, and we're going to be in this together. We're even going to share what we're struggling with, so that we can all kind of be together in this. Do you have kind of any closing thoughts on that project, or just this kind of idea of authenticity and vulnerability here?
Yeah, I love that, Lene, if that's how you're sorry for mispronouncing your name again, but I love that idea of actually saying like, what are you afraid of, right? And inviting that. I think that's really cool. Also, I lived in Copenhagen for a year, so I love, that was such a formative time in my life, and I really loved it. So I'm a little bit jealous of you right now too. But it's funny, we did one of the other things that we did over the summer was we put our associate dean for undergraduate programs we made him available at 2 kind of clutch times for Q&As with students where they could ask him anything, and he just got on, you know, I gave him the login information. I'm like, you need to do this yourself because it needs to be just you and nothing else. And so he answered so many student questions, and a lot of them were things like, do you miss us? Like, you know, you know, and he was so good in those situations, right, where he could be like, actually, yeah, it's really awful. It's really hard. And you know, I'm really concerned about all of you and your academic progression and like how you're doing at home and if you have everything you need. And so, you know, in addition to all the technical questions that people were asking about, like pass fail and that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I was really fortunate to have leadership who was willing to make themselves accessible, to use to make that a, you know, a dialogue piece for students. And I think that also, and to some degree, laid the foundation for us being able to execute the check-in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rebekah, for spending this time with us. I'm going to share my screen one more time and just end here. Let's see. But yeah, I mean, this was a phenomenal discussion, and thank you so much again for joining us. We'll have the link up later that if people miss this and they registered, they can watch this on demand. Certainly share your thoughts. I apologize I didn't mention this early on, but I saw a few tags on Twitter from the eduWeb Conf account. Feel free to share your thoughts on today's webinar there. We'd love to engage with you. All of you who tuned in today, thank you again for being here. And Rebekah, one more thank you to you, and have a great rest of your day, and thanks for sharing this with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jon.
Okay, take care, everyone.